I'm Monica, a 26-year-old web designer, growing up in a small rural town with my grandparents, parents, and younger sister. Linda was a journey filled with challenges. Linda, 7 years younger than me, was always the center of attention. Her opinions were always prioritized, making me feel invisible and overlooked. The favoritism was undeniable. On her birthdays, Linda would receive extravagant gifts, while mine, which coincided with Christmas, were a mere afterthought, often combined into one gift of something like books that didn't interest me. When Linda took up soccer, our parents were her #1 supporters, attending every game and practice without fail. But when I played my last tennis match in middle school, they couldn't even make time to attend, busy chauffeuring Linda around. This pattern of favoritism shaped my childhood, creating feelings of loneliness and inadequacy. However, Linda wasn't blind to the inequality. She frequently stood up for me when our parents compared us unfavorably. "Monica is great at studying and teaching. She can do anything," she would assert. After my final tennis match, Linda even handed me a bouquet of flowers she had picked herself, whispering, "Well done." Our grandparents noticed the injustice and tried to intervene, reprimanding our parents for their biased treatment. But after my grandmother's passing, followed shortly by my grandfather's, the little shield I had between me and my parents was gone. For a while, Linda continued to support me, but as my mother began turning her harsh treatment toward Linda, she eventually stopped. "If you're always going to take your sister's side, you might as well leave," my mother would sneer. In an attempt to protect Linda, I urged her to stop defending me. From that point onward, Linda poured herself into excelling in both sports and academics, becoming the daughter our parents proudly celebrated. Meanwhile, after the funerals, my parents faced financial struggles and informed me that they couldn't afford college tuition. My dream of studying design was crushed. Instead, I graduated from high school and took a job at a small design company far from home. I started as an office assistant, seizing every chance to learn from the designers, all while continuing to study web design on weekends. 3 years later, I was promoted to the design team, and 5 years after that, I became a full-fledged web designer, trusted with leading projects. Throughout this period, I distanced myself from home, avoiding visits that only reminded me of my parents' disapproval. My career became my focus. 8 years after high school, I received surprising news. Linda was preparing for university entrance exams, aiming for a prestigious medical school in the city. Despite everything, I felt proud of her when she was accepted into her top choice school. I congratulated her with warmth, saying, "Linda, congrats, you've worked so hard, and I admire your dedication." She thanked me, embarrassed, and then revealed a concern. "The school suggested a donation. It's not mandatory, but Mom and Dad are worried about the impression it would give if we don't contribute. They don't know what to do, considering how high tuition and living costs are." Linda planned to work part-time to cover her living expenses, but I could see how burdensome medical school would be. My parents, unable to afford the donation, had pushed Linda to ask me for help instead of coming to me themselves. I was stunned by their audacity. Despite my resentment, I couldn't ignore Linda's predicament. I decided to help, covering both the donation and entrance fees, so she could start her university journey. Linda moved into an apartment near the campus, not far from where I lived, and I thought she could rely on me if she ever needed help. However, as she settled into college life, her messages to me became more curt. "I want to eat this," or "I need this, buy it for me," would come through, and I'd always accommodate her, doing what our parents couldn't. We occasionally met for meals, but even then, she was distant, more focused on her smartphone than engaging with me. When I tried to talk about her studies or lift her spirits, she'd brush me off, complaining about how difficult studying was. I was left feeling confused. During one of our dinners, I tried to lighten the mood with a comment. "Mom and Dad probably only care about you," I said, smiling, but Linda suddenly looked at me coldly and snorted. "Of course, a medical student like me and a high school graduate designer like you are incomparable. No one cares about a job that doesn't even require qualifications like yours." Her words stung. "There's no need to say it like that," I responded, taken aback. Linda rolled her eyes. "It's the truth. Being a designer is just a title. Anyone can make a website by looking it up online. You'd probably be better off getting a real qualification, but that's tough for someone who only graduated high school." I tried to explain. "It's not that simple. I'm working hard every day, studying, learning. You shouldn't judge me without understanding." Linda dismissed me with a glance of disapproval. "Dad and Mom are right. They say you're a disappointment. someone who couldn't even go to college. I'm only here because they told me to look out for you and make sure you don't fall any further. Her words hit me like a punch. I recalled the years of comparisons. Linda is smart, kind, and dependable, while Monica is stupid, clumsy, and can't do anything. I lowered my head, feeling suffocated. When Linda saw me quiet, she mistakenly assumed I was upset and smiled. Worked. I'm going home now, she said briskly and left. Living on her own had changed Linda. Surrounded by high achievers and constantly praised by our parents, she believed the image they painted of her as the perfect future doctor. Meanwhile, the disdain they had for me echoed in her tone and attitude, as if she had fully embraced their judgment. That winter, as usual, I returned home for the holidays. My parents had asked me to come with Linda, who hadn't been back since starting university. As soon as we arrived, it was clear who was the center of attention. The table was laden with steak, pizza, and treats, all to celebrate her visit. Later that evening, neighbors, relatives, and even Linda's old classmates gathered for a grand party. Linda soaked up the praise, boasting loudly about her life at university. Mom keeps asking me to come home more often, but you know how tough it is at the country's most prestigious medical school. I can't just leave my team projects or relax at home. People are always contacting me about something, and it's exhausting. I stayed in the kitchen, avoiding the limelight, but I could hear her voice filling the room. To our parents and relatives, her bragging was fine, but to the neighbors and old classmates, it must have been tiresome. When I brought out a tray of wine, an elderly neighbor tried to shift the attention to me. "Monica, aren't you working in design?" Before I could respond, Linda and our parents cut in. "You can't really say much about her. She's trying, but she didn't even go to college." "She's such a letdown," my mother remarked without hesitation. The room immediately became uncomfortable. Many of the people present hadn't attended college and were busy raising families or working hard, yet none of them contradicted her. Only my parents and Linda seemed unaware of the tension. Feeling humiliated, I attempted to leave, but Linda stopped me. "You still come home a lot, don't you, Monica? I guess you never think things through. Maybe that's why you're so confident," she said, laughing obnoxiously. Our parents joined in, chuckling as though it was all just a joke. "You're being too harsh, Linda," my father added sarcastically. My anger surged, and I clenched my fists, managing to say, "Maybe I won't come back next year. I get it now." Relatives and neighbors exchanged concerned glances, but I ignored them. Setting the tray aside, I grabbed my coat and purse. Linda grinned as I prepared to leave. "I understand, don't bother coming back," she said, waving me off, and my parents echoed her words nonchalantly. My heart pounded with a mix of anger and sadness as I stepped into the cold night, leaving behind the people who had so thoroughly dismissed me. I didn't glance back as I walked toward the station, struggling to contain the emotions raging inside me. Coming home had always left me with a heavy heart. When I was striving to become a web designer, I could use my studies as an excuse to distance myself from my parents. But as I grew older and advanced in my career, cutting ties became harder. The pressure of family obligations lingered, even as I struggled with the disappointment and anger I felt toward them. Linda was still a university student, naive to the challenges of working life. Maybe that's why she didn't understand how difficult it was to navigate the world on my own. I told myself that our parents had probably done their best to raise us, but it was undeniable that they had spent years elevating Linda while belittling me. That winter, Linda's cruel behavior during the family gathering cemented my decision. I realized that to preserve my self-worth, I couldn't continue this toxic relationship, even with my own family. It was then I made the choice to sever ties for good. Months passed since my decision. One day, I received an unexpected call from Linda. When I ignored it, she persistently left voicemails asking me to answer. Finally, I reluctantly picked up. "Did you pay my tuition?" Linda asked, her voice a mix of urgency and entitlement. "I covered the entrance fee and the donation before you enrolled," I replied, trying to remain calm. "What about this year's tuition?" "The university needs it urgently," she said. "I'm not aware of that," I answered. Even over the phone, I could tell she was uncomfortable. I had used up my savings to pay for her initial costs, the entrance fee, donation, and first-year tuition. That money had nearly depleted my funds, and I had planned to pay subsequent fees as they came due. But after the way they treated me, it was unfathomable that they would expect me to continue supporting Linda. "I paid the donation because I wanted to help you," I said firmly. "Didn't Mom and Dad send you to that expensive out-of-state university because they could afford it?" Or did they send you knowing they didn't have the money? That's not the case, Linda stammered. I have wealthy friends, so there are other costs aside from tuition and living. Mom and Dad managed those, but now they can't afford the tuition. That's why they told me to contact you. It all clicked. My parents had likely counted on me for financial help from the start, especially after my career took off. I had joined a well-known design firm where my skills were recognized, and my salary had grown significantly. Although I had saved carefully, my initial support for Linda was meant to be temporary, not an ongoing obligation. From what I could tell, the money meant for her education had been squandered on her personal enjoyment. Still, I couldn't bring myself to forgive her. Helping her with tuition wouldn't have been difficult financially, but I refused. A few days later, my parents called, demanding I pay for Linda's tuition. Their tone was accusatory, only deepening my resentment. It was clear they saw me only as a money source, not a family member. Their utter lack of respect and consideration made it impossible for me to comply. Linda started calling almost daily, her messages full of selfish pleas. Please, please pay my tuition. If you don't, I'll be expelled. Scholarships and part-time jobs aren't enough. It would be a shame if someone like me had to leave school. I'll pay you back when I start working. Just help me, as family. She even left ridiculous messages like, if you're upset because they told you not to come home, I can try to convince Mom and Dad. I saved her messages in a separate folder, then deleted everything else and blocked her number. No one should be treated like a doormat, not even by family. After that, I cut off all communication. A relative later told me that Linda had managed to secure scholarships and loans for her second year's tuition, but without financial help for living expenses. She had to work part-time. Balancing work and school became too difficult, and she eventually failed several courses. In the end, she dropped out of university altogether. With no other options, Linda moved back in with our parents, but with their finances drained, there was no chance of transferring her to another school. She didn't seek local work, either. Instead, she became reclusive, spending her time playing video games and lashing out at night in fits of stress. A friend living nearby told me the sounds of their family arguments echoed through the neighborhood. My parents, once so proud of Linda, seemed helpless to deal with her. As time passed, things only deteriorated. My father, overwhelmed by stress, caused a scandal. He was accused of groping a woman on the train during his commute. Though the case was settled without charges, he resigned in shame. My mother, who lacked work experience, struggled to find a job that could support the family. They occasionally tried to reach me through relatives, but their messages remained the same, demanding and unapologetic. Eventually, even the relatives gave up. We'll handle it here, don't worry, they told me, cutting off all further communication. I later heard through the grapevine that Linda and my father, both unemployed, were living in near poverty. My mother, overwhelmed and frustrated, had disappeared, leaving them to fend for themselves. Without any goodwill left in the neighborhood, no one offered them help. Meanwhile, my life took a different turn. My career as a designer thrived. I was invited to participate in a major project that would make my name known in the industry. With the project nearing completion and my savings secure, I decided to pursue a long-held dream, taking university entrance exams. Now, I plan to study business management, aiming to eventually become independent. For the first time in years, I feel excitement for the challenges that lie ahead. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video. Stay stunned.